Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and welcome to part 3 of our reviews slash overview slash epic saga about the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game by Chaosium. Now in the last episode we talked about how to build a character and different techniques that I use to build a character for Call of Cthulhu. And in this episode we're going to talk about different things that a keeper or player should look at when they're trying to build their party for a campaign for Call of Cthulhu. Now, this wasn't a topic that I had actually originally planned on discussing when I did my original outline. However, a viewer commented on one of my other videos about any suggestions that I had for actually assembling a campaign, and I thought, that's actually a really important thing that a lot of game masters need to know, because if you're not ready for it, it can catch you a little bit off guard. Now, in other role-playing games, such as Dungeons & Dragons, and once again, I'm going to use D&D a lot for my examples, just because most people are familiar with it, so that works really well for compare and contrast. But in games like Dungeons & Dragons, if you're going to do just a general campaign, then a lot of game masters can just simply look at their group and say, okay, everybody, give me a third-level character, any race and class, whatever. And if it is just a general campaign, then the Dungeon Master can have them build these characters and they can just go forward from there. The characters all meet each other in a tavern or on the road or any of the other thousands of places that RPG characters have met one another. And the question as to why these characters are even traveling together after the first adventure, or even initially, isn't really asked, because at the core of it, they're still adventurers, and that's what adventurers do. So it doesn't matter whether they're heroes or they're anti-heroes, they're all still adventurers nonetheless, and that's kind of an assumed role that all characters in D&D or other games like that are going to have, once again if it's just a general campaign. However, in games like Call of Cthulhu, the characters are not adventurers. Really, they're just normal people who, through some unusual circumstance, have glimpsed behind the curtain of this mundane reality and witnessed the secret horrors beyond. This is an extremely story-based game that's a lot about mystery and investigation. And the investigators can be of a lot of different professional occupations, be of different educational and social standings, and the why that they're together is a little bit harder to explain. So if a Call of Cthulhu game master was just to look at their group and say, hey guys, go ahead and give me a character, anything from the investigator guide is fine, then it would be very easy for them to end up with a party that consists of a bootlegger, a medical doctor, an acrobat, a deep-sea diver, and a hobo. And coming up with a plausible reason why these people with vastly different incomes and social circles would even be in the same room together can be a bit of a challenge. Not impossible to do, but a bit of a challenge. Now, if the group is going to be just for a one-shot game, or if it's going to be a long campaign that's really just one adventure that takes place over multiple sessions, then that's not hard to explain. You can always come up with some reason for the group to initially get together. However, most campaigns don't work that way. Most campaigns are just kind of a series of multiple scenarios, one after another, sort of a, adventure of the week sort of thing. So, this week we're going off to Europe to go to the auction, and next week we're going to be going off to Asia to go to this archaeological dig. They're going to be totally different adventures, and those are the type of games where it suddenly becomes very, very difficult to explain why these people are even together anymore. And that is what the problem happens, because the plausibility begins to stretch. And in a story-based game like Call of Cthulhu, you want to at least keep it believable as to why these people are together, and the game master ends up having to do a lot of mental hurdles at the beginning of every adventure trying to explain why this group of 5 or 6, or however big your group is, are even hanging out together, let alone why they would get this job to begin with. And this can lead to a lot of disappointment for the players and a lot of frustration and disappointment for the game master just trying to justify the group's existence. And as far as the dilemma of story hooks, why are these group of people getting hired for this job to begin with? For example, in the classic haunting scenario, which is probably the most played Call of Cthulhu scenario of all time, it's been an introductory scenario for over 30 years, and it's currently available for free in the 7th edition quick guide. I'm going to go ahead and stick links down at the bottom if you've never played the haunting. Highly recommend it. But in that scenario, the player characters are hired to investigate a haunted house. So once again, let's look at this group, this party that we assembled, because the game master didn't give any direction to their players. So the question here becomes, why would this group of people, including a doctor, a diver, and a hobo, be tasked with looking into a haunted house? Well, okay, so one method might be that these 5 characters of completely different backgrounds all have a mutual friend in common. And that mutual friend is the landlord of the haunted house that's asking them to investigate it. Okay, that works. We can go forward with that adventure. But once that scenario is done, once the secret of the haunted house has been solved, what is stopping the medical doctor from then going back to the hospital and going about their life as a doctor, and stopping the diver from then getting on the next boat, going out to sea and doing some diving, or the hobo to jump on the next train to go to the next town, and these 5 people never ever to speak to each other again? And the answer is there really isn't anything stopping them, because they probably have no reason to ever speak again. So there are several ways that a game master and players can handle this in order for the campaign to keep going forward. That way everybody can play the character that they want to play. The first one of these is Investigator Organizations, meaning that while the party might consist of characters from extremely varied walks of life, they all belong to the same group or organization. The Investigator's Guide has dedicated an entire chapter to this subject, and the reason that Chaosium put it in the Investigator's Guide rather than just in the Keeper's Guide is because this is the subject that players are encouraged to take part in. They have several example organizations, ranging from one that was a unit from the Great War that discovered something really unnatural and strange, and they've kept in touch even though the war is now over, to several others that are pretty much just social clubs that people belong to. Maybe the investigators at the beginning of the campaign belong to one of these clubs, they're trying to belong to one of these clubs. Or maybe after their first experience with the mythos, either prior to the first game or after the first game, are going to end up joining or creating one of these clubs. And Keepers, one thing I strongly recommend is that if your players, if you want them to create an investigator organization after their first adventure, you might need to give them some friendly little nudges that direction to make sure that they understand that this is something you want. Otherwise, they might not catch the hint and go off and do their own thing. Now, one thing that I do suggest with investigator organizations, that you let the players help create it. Even if their characters at the very beginning of the campaign are not members of this organization or the prospective members of the organization, but if the players help name the organization, come up with its motto and its secret handshake and its nice, cryptic looking seal, it gives the players a nice sense of ownership for that group, and it makes them really feel like that's something that's really important to them, and that's something that you really would like in your campaign, is for the characters to have a feeling of ownership about this organization. These organizations not only help in explaining why these characters that have nothing else in common are hanging out together, but it works really good for adventure hooks. You could have that NPC that's down on their luck, and they've gone to the police, and they've gone to different detectives, and no one is able to help them. They can finally kind of walk into the group's clubhouse and go, hey guys, I got a really weird problem, and maybe you can help me out. So it works really good for adventure hooks to get them started on the different quests that you want them to do. But the organization can also provide a lot of great contacts as far as NPCs that can help the PCs along. And it's also a great way for the player characters to recruit new player characters. If maybe one of the characters got killed or driven insane, or maybe just bring a new player into the group. And now you can use the organization as a great way to explain of why they're here and how they joined so quickly, and kind of cut straight to the adventure. Aside from investigative organizations, another method that game masters can do is give your players a theme when they're creating their player characters. Give them a direction that they should build their characters toward. Maybe have them all be employed by the same company, like a detective agency. They don't all have to be professional detectives as their occupation. You've also got former cops and accountants and lawyers and drivers and all sorts of other things like that. And that can give a lot of good playing hooks if they're all with some sort of detective agency. Or you could say that they're with some sort of publication, like a small newspaper, a bi-weekly magazine. Maybe have the publication have a cult or an unsolved mysteries theme to it. And then the players are always trying to get a new lead as they're trying to make their deadline for the next issue coming out. And that can lead to a lot of good adventure hooks as well. You can even take that a few steps further and not have whatever company they're with or whatever theme be anything about the mythos or about investigation at all. Maybe they're a band. Maybe you could have, one of them is the singer and the other is like a guitar player. Then you got your manager and your tour bus driver and your mechanic that works on the car and does the lighting and the sound for all their gigs. And the group travels around and goes on tour, playing shows and fighting the mythos and solving mysteries, kind of like Josie and the Pussycats or something like that. The Investigator's Guide gives a few ideas for choosing connections between investigators, thus giving a plausible reason why these vastly different people will continue working together adventure to adventure. And most of these are very simple ideas, but for new keepers that have either never run before or they're just used to things like Dungeons and Dragons, where every character is assumed to be an adventurer, so it's never been anything they've had to worry about, this can really help a lot of those game masters out in order to solve a problem before it ever happens, because it's just a small thing to do, but it can save you a lot of headaches further down the road. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you 2 examples of different methods that I've employed in my own campaigns. Maybe these examples will inspire somebody to come up with something different or better for their own campaign, or maybe keepers can steal it and use it for themselves. Either way is perfectly fine to do. The first one that we did, the PCs were all wanting to join a society that was called the Arcanum Club. I know, really, really original name there. And the club was a coffee bar that was set in Boston and had a sort of an occultish theme to it. There were different photographs on the walls of famous spiritualists and mediums. There was some Houdini shackles that he'd escaped from that were mounted above the bar. And a lot of people, mostly students, would show up here and hang out and practice palmistry and talk about the occult and that sort of thing that you do in coffee bars when you're in college. However, there was another layer to the Arcanum Club, and everybody knew about it. That was kind of the inner circle of it. But in order to join the inner circle, where there was some sort of speakeasy that was hidden somewhere in the building with some vast library of occult stuff, in order to get into the inner circle, a character had to bring forward some sort of proof of the supernatural or some sort of verifiable time that they have encountered the supernatural. So the game began with the players wanting to get into the supernatural inner circle, but they were trying to find some sort of proof that they had encountered the supernatural. Sort of, pics or it didn't happen. So for the first game, they had an NPC friend of theirs who was a detective who was a member of the inner circle. And that detective was getting a job to investigate a haunted house, and he grabbed the PCs and said,
"Hey guys, I got a really easy peasy case going on here. I figured, you know what? You needed to see a ghost, so you might as well come along and join me. Get to have a supernatural experience, maybe even can get a snapshot of it, and boom, you're in the club. Also, my car is in the shop, so you're driving."
And that's how we first did the haunting scenario. After that, the PCs entered the club, and they were able to use the club for different adventure hooks, as well as great resources, as well as a means of bringing in new player characters when you had to retire player characters because they were either dead or insane. The next campaign that we did, I took a little bit of a different approach to it. First, I told all of the players that when they were making their characters, they had 3 options they could do. The first one is they could be detectives, they could be journalists, or they could have some sort of link to academia. The game was going to take place in Arkham, and I preferred it if the characters were a little bit wealthy. The starting group included a private detective, a doctoral student in linguistics, and 2 very wealthy characters, one being an anthropologist, the other being an archaeologist, that had deep familial relationship with Miskatonic University, such as they had, pieces of their private collections, of their family collections that were in the Miskatonic Museum, and their family had a history of being on the Miskatonic board, so they were very deeply rooted into the university there. And this gave us a lot of different hooks in order for us to start campaigns, some of them being Miskatonic related, which a lot of adventures are related to Miskatonic U. Then there's the detective style story, so I had a detective we could pull in those. And then we could also pull in any adventures using with the different academic focuses that the characters had, such as linguistics or anthropology or archaeology. Plus the characters were rich, at least 2 of them were rich, and that's really handy to have as a few rich player characters. Now, I then took it a few steps further by having the very first adventure begin at a private party of a wealthy Arkham socialite. And he hosted a monthly sort of amateur astronomy get-together at his house, where he had a private observatory. This was mostly a social club for the elite of the town. The NPC host, which is really just a blatant ripoff of Duke de Richelieu from The Devil Rides Out. Hey, I said I love that story and I make no apologies about it. He had some mythos experience. So the first adventure begins after one of these astronomy meetings, and a lot of the NPC guests have left, and it's leaving the PCs and a few key NPCs around, and they're having a few drinks from the stockpile that their host had made prior to the passing of Prohibition. And the conversation goes from astronomy to astrology and eventually to the occult. And it ended up kind of leading to the mythos and all the secrets of the universe. Now, two of the player characters at the beginning of the game had mythos experience. Another one had no mythos experience, but was a firm believer in the supernatural and occult. And then two of the others had no belief in it whatsoever. So it was a really great dynamic of them kind of role-playing out this debate. Now, their host, the NPC, explains to them that once a person's eyes have been opened to the mythos, and they've kind of been awakened to this true reality that's out there, they're going to begin encountering the mythos more and more after that. And it's kind of like, when you hear a word for the very first time, you've never heard this word before in your life, but all of a sudden, once you know this word and you know what it means, you start hearing other people using it, and you're reading about it in books and in the newspaper, and you suddenly start wondering, was this word always there and I just never noticed it before and I was somehow blind to it? Or is the universe actually sending me this word more often now that I'm aware of it? And that's kind of how the mythos works, at least according to their host at this party. Now, some of the PCs that didn't believe it, he went ahead and told the group that there was going to be a traveling medium that was going to be coming through Ipswich, and she was a totally legit and very famous medium. And because he had a lot of connections, he could get them a seat at the seance and offered this to all the player characters who readily agreed, thinking that that was going to be the adventure. And then once they decided to leave for Ipswich, thanks to some convenient car trouble, they all had to ride in the same car to get there, and that's when I hit them with the deadlight scenario. After that, the player organization of this casual astronomy club, followed by the after-hours party of astrology and mythos and the supernatural, became a great source of potential adventures for future games. I even brought that up in my review I did for the Star on the Shore scenario of how I used this group. The setup using a mix of academics and detectives and then later writers that we used for other characters really helped us give a wide array of different scenarios, and it worked very, very well for us. In fact, most of the Call of Cthulhu reviews that I have on my YouTube channel, those were all adventures from this campaign that had that as the setup. So a lot of people might ask of how I did so many adventures. Well, that was the setup that allowed us to do it, and it worked very, very well for us. So for any new keepers out there or potential keepers that are watching this, if you want to run a campaign with a lot of different adventures, I strongly suggest that you put some forethought into either a theme or an organization or something like that to allow the game to flow much smoother story-wise and save yourself a bunch of the headache of trying to shoehorn your group into any potential scenario. And if possible, give your players some sort of ownership of this organization or theme by giving them, some sort of say in what it is. And that way, that if they're invested into it, that makes it much more fun and much more exciting, and they get into it much, much more. Now, so this is it. This is a very short episode. Next episode, we're going to dive into the crunchy aspects of Call of Cthulhu and the game mechanics for it regarding skills and improving skills and luck and all that other fun stuff. So I will be back soon.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the review, please give it a like. If you want to see some more of our other reviews or other episodes in this series, just hit that subscribe button. And if you have any requests for anything in particular you want us to touch on while we're doing this series, just hit us up in the comments below. Until next time, gamers, you have a great day.